What's up, everybody? Welcome back to part 3 of this breakdown series, the final part where I'm going to be talking about the mixing and the processing applied to this, medley. And so let's go right into it. I'm going to show you exactly all the processes I did to make the arrangement sound as good as possible, and hopefully you won't get overwhelmed by the amount of plugins I actually used here. So here we go. Just take a look here. So as you can see, this is a absolutely devastating amount of plugins used here, and you need at least 100 plugins on your mix to make it sound good nowadays. That's why there's so many tools out. So all these companies know that you need a million plugins in order to get a good sounding mix. So let's just start with the master bus here. You can see that I've started with kind of the Greg Wells mix centering. Actually, I should mention beforehand. I've said before in other mixing videos of mine, that when you start, or before you start a mix, actually, a good idea is kind of to go through and see which instruments could use a little bit of an EQ cut to the lowest end, just so you can get rid of any sub-frequencies that might clog up the frequency spectrum, And so, but in this case, you can see I don't have really much any EQ going on. And the reason is because when I pulled up an EQ for most of these instruments, I actually didn't really find any problem frequencies with pretty much any of the horns from Glory Days, and that's something that's pretty rare. So I think I did an EQ on Screaming Trumpet, you can see. I did an EQ on the solos, because those were recorded live, and they're not recorded like the best studio spaces or anything in the world. So a little bit of treatment there is required, but nothing crazy. You can see here, I didn't really do the EQ for the solo, actually. I just did a reverb. So in this case, I didn't really do EQ for all the tracks. I just did it for a couple of them that I thought were a little bit muddy. So that's like for the Easy Drummer 2, I applied an EQ cut kind of around the 345 area. Just there's a little bit of boxiness there. It's at a little bit amateurish, so I took that bit out, and then I increased a little bit of the high end just to get a bit more crispiness. So I started off with the Greg Wells Mix Centric. It's a Waves plugin, and basically it's kind of like a mix sweetener. So if you're familiar with my videos, I like to do a process called top-down mixing. This is something I learned from Graham Cochran from the Recording Revolution. Big fan of his, and basically his main message is saying less is more. So in case you didn't get the sarcasm at the beginning, you actually don't need very many plugins to get a good mix. And some of the best mixers, basically do more with less. And the less plugins you have, you kind of force yourself to make decisions that actually impact the mix versus putting on a bunch of plugins that actually don't do anything, So in this case, I put on the mix centric just to give the arrangement a little bit more spice. And let's just hear what this sounds like with and without it. So actually, you know what? I'm gonna turn it off first. Turn it on. Off. Can you hear there's an extra brightness? There's a little bit of a polish to it that wasn't there before when I didn't have it. So this plugin is doing quite a lot. There's EQ going on, there's compression, there's saturation, there's about a bunch of stuff under the hood. So as the producer, it's our job to use one knob plugins very responsibly. So I felt that what's the amount? 15.8 was just enough for this medley here. Then I followed that up with tone centric, which is kind of like a vintage saturation type of plugin. So that added a little bit of that fairy dust that I wanted there on top, and it made it sound a little bit warmer in total. So let's just hear what that sounds like. Turn it off. So to me, it starts to breathe a little bit more. There's a little bit more of a lift in the overall feeling, and I just thought that was pretty interesting, the effect that gave me. Before we go into the ozone, let me just go over these other plugins here. So you can see I have a reverb plugin, and I've loaded up East-West Spaces too, and I've gone with a basic San Francisco hall because I felt the sound of the hall kind of matches the Teldec's scoring stage in Berlin. So basically, whenever possible, I try to match the spaces of my instruments to get a cohesive sound, right? So ignore the sine player here. I was just experimenting with Junkie XL Brass. But anyway, we have the EQ for the drums. Let's see what other processing we have here. So for the reverb, I have a couple of sends. I sent the trumpet cup to it. I sent the alto sax runs to it. I could have played around with the microphone positions a little more, but in this case, I really like the sound of the San Francisco hall, so that's what I went with there. And then I did the same for the solos. So you can see the most processing I have on any instrument is for this trombone solo. So I started with an EQ just to take off that, some of that. Actually, the EQ did the bulk of the work, so you have a you could hear it cuts off or it takes out some of those muddy frequencies that were there. So I just removed that. Put a little bit of a compressor on because this solo was very dynamic. So I wanted to even it out a little bit. Valhalla Room just adds some reverb, convolution reverb, but it's pretty cool. Oh, sorry, algorithmic. Convolution would be like if you actually had it from the actual hall itself. So without it sounds like this. So I decided to add just a little bit more to there. And then what else? So we have the tone centric here as well, because I felt that the recording was just a little bit flat. So I kind of boosted it up with some tone centric to give it just a little bit of a push. And then finally, little micro shift. This is really good as a stereo widener. So without it, I had a little bit of a mono sound to it, just a little bit. And then basically, I turn it up just a little bit to give it that kind of stereo spread, just a little bit. I wanted to fill out the spectrum just a little bit more. And you can see here, I've also sent some of these trumpets to the reverb as well. So that's all kind of a matter of taste, how much reverb you actually want to apply to make everything sound cohesive. So I've done a little bit of an EQ cut in Screaming Trumpet because it is so filled with those high frequencies that I thought it was a little bit too much. So I cut some of those out. If we just hear a little bit of that, let's see, where could we find it? Let's go kind of go over here. So you take some of that out, it makes it a little less harsh. And in the context of everything else, it makes it sit nice and smoothly with it. Now I've got the Screaming Trumpet layered with the Trumpet 1, so there's a little bit of a interaction there between those two. And I just think this little bit of an EQ cut helped the Screaming Trumpet play a little better with Trumpet 1 from Glory Days. So there we go. That is the processing. Again, it's very, very minimal, but the entire approach is to work from the master fader and work your way down into groups. If you have groups of tracks, then like drums, drum group, string group, woodwinds, brass, whatever it is, start with the top so you can get a nice sounding mix right away. Then you work your way down to the groups, and the groups you can apply EQ, you can apply compression to the individual sections, saturation, whatever you want. If an overall section is missing something, give that its own treatment. Then after that's done, you move to the individual tracks, and that's when you do any final polishes. Then individual instruments can be treated on their own. So that's kind of the way I do things, and I think it's a lot faster this way. It saves me a lot of time I see a lot of people kind of starting from the ground up and, working on individual tracks first. And then by the time they get to the master, it's already been like 2 hours or 3 hours. And just to do a basic rough mix using this top-down mixing method, it took me about 30 minutes to 45 minutes. And then I spent another, like a little bit more time just, making sure it sounded good to me. Now, again, this method I also employed because I knew that I didn't need to do too much processing here. The overall sound quality, the recording quality of the library sounds very, very good. So it's already professionally recorded and treated in a way where it's pretty much mix ready. Like you don't have to do too much to it. So I basically did a bit of sweetening in general, and I really like the results. So hopefully, it was helpful, this video, just to show that you really don't need much to make a mix sound good, as long as you have the recordings recorded properly. Working with virtual instruments, we expect all the instruments to be recorded very well, and this library is no exception. So hopefully you're working with well recorded tracks, and your mixing will just be a lot easier. So I hope this helped. Thank you so much for watching this series. I will see you in the very next video. And yeah, stay tuned for that. I'll see you then, and have a great day. Bye-bye.